September 2019, Riverview, Manitoba. Renovators were working in the basement of the Holy Salvation Church, dismantling old masonry, when they came across something unexpected, a wall that shouldn't have been there. After a few hammer blows, a narrow corridor opened up, leading to a bricked-up iron door. One of the workers jokingly threw it open. "Is this the entrance to hell?" But when they broke through the hole, the jokes stopped. There were bones on the ground, small ones. An hour later, the police were working under the church. If there was one person in Riverview who could be called the moral compass of the town, it was Pastor Zach Ngobezi. He arrived in the community back in the mid-90s, when Holy Salvation Church was going through a difficult time. Attendance was declining, and funding was barely enough to maintain the building. But with the arrival of Ngobezi, everything changed. His sermons were not just words. They touched people's hearts, made them think, and opened the way to God. He not only talked about mercy, but also set an example himself. He organized charity events, helped the poor, and supported young people. Every Sunday after the service, fairs were held on the square near the church, where they sold homemade pastries, vegetables from their own farms, and clothes for the needy. This was his initiative, an idea that changed the city. He was not just a pastor, he was part of our family. That's what his congregation said about him. His wife, Marissa Ngobezi, 51, worked at a local grocery store. She didn't like to be the center of attention, always kept in her husband's shadow. She never complained, never shared her problems. They had 2 children, Nyang Ngobezi, 29, who worked in tourism and moved to Winnipeg. Lemek Ngobezi, 25, an auto mechanic, stayed in Riverview. The pastor's family was a model of godly living. There was no scandal, no drama, only harmony, love, and service to the community. It seemed that Zach Ngobezi lived in service to others. He never refused to help, whether it was repairing the roof of old Mrs. Goodman's house or helping a young mother find money for her child's treatment. He was so well respected that even the Riverview police turned to him when they needed to calm conflicts among teenagers or help with street preaching. In the town, he was called the voice of conscience. But in any society, there are things that people do not notice or do not want to notice. In the late afternoon, when everyone was already going home, the pastor was often alone in the church. And if someone asked, he would answer simply, "I like the silence after a noisy day. It is my time for reflection and prayer." And people believed him, because how can you not believe someone who has become your spiritual mentor? But everyone who came to the church during those hours noticed something strange. Ngobezi's eyes were empty, as if he was somewhere far away in his thoughts. Sometimes Marissa would come home from work and find him sitting in his office in complete darkness. "Zach, are you feeling okay?" "Yeah, honey, just praying." And she believed him, because if you can't trust your own husband, who can you trust? But many years later, everyone will realize that it was not a prayer. It was something completely different. The late 90s, Riverview. Zach Ngobezi had been a pastor at Holy Salvation for several years, and his authority in the community was only growing. He helped, mentored, and preached. People trusted him unconditionally. But behind this facade of impeccability was a temptation that ate him up from the inside every night. He could not sleep. He would lie in bed with his eyes open, stare at the ceiling, and feel reality gradually fade away, dissolving into darkness. Deep, black thoughts did not give him peace. They were becoming unbearable. One day, after a tiring day, he overheard 2 men talking in the back room of the supermarket where his wife worked. After that, it's like falling into warm water, and nothing else bothers you. Do you understand? Clean as a whistle. Heroin. Zach stood around the corner, not breathing. The word had ravaged his mind. That night, he found the person he needed to find. At first, he explained it to himself simply. He's not a drug addict. He just wants some peace. First dose, the second time, the third. His body relaxed. His anxiety disappeared. The thoughts that had been pounding him from the inside became fuzzy. It was liberating. That night, he fell as deep as he hadn't slept in years, a habit that had become part of his life. He was not a fool. He knew he had to hide his addiction. Day after day, he learned the skill of 2 faces. the preacher by day and the man who injected himself with peace at night. His behavior remained impeccable. He gave inspirational sermons, helped the needy, and visited the sick. No one suspected that after the evening service, when everyone was leaving, the pastor would lock the church doors and go down to the basement. There in the darkness, among the dust and old church things, he would let himself go, alone in the basement, with a needle in his vein, a few minutes in silence. No fear, no remorse. For a long time, Ngobezi's wife Marissa did not notice anything unusual, but then small details began to emerge. Zach began to stay in church more often after the service. "Work, honey. We need to pray," he would say. But she noticed something strange in his eyes. They were becoming glassy, unusually empty. One evening, she asked him directly, "Why do you stay overnight in the church so often?" Zach answered without blinking, "It's the only place I can find peace." And she believed him. Because if you can't trust your own husband, who can you trust at all? But in reality, it was not peace. It was the silence that heroin brought. June 1996. Riverview was living its usual life. Warm summer evenings, gatherings on porches, children riding bicycles through the narrow streets. Drake Malabi, a skinny 10-year-old boy with a wide smile and big inquisitive eyes, was one of those everyone knew. He grew up in the family of a single mother, Mrs. Esther Mulabi, who worked 2 jobs to support her son. Drake often came to church events by himself. There was always free candy, and he loved listening to the pastor, although he did not always understand his long sermons. On June 25, 1996, Drake did not return home after a summer Bible camp at Holy Salvation. At first, his mother did not panic. Drake was an inquisitive boy who could stay over at friends' houses or play in the yard. But when it got dark and he wasn't home, the woman started calling friends. No one had seen him in the afternoon. That was the last thing they could find out. Drake stayed after church and helped move books to the basement, and then he disappeared. When the police took up the case, it didn't cause much of a stir. A 10-year-old boy who lived in a modest house without a father, in a city with no high crime rate? The investigators' version was simple. He ran away. Officer Trevor Martin personally interviewed Pastor Ngobazi because he was the last person to see Drake. Zach acted like a man who really cared. He said that Drake was helping out at the church and then said he was going home. He was a good kid. "I can't imagine what could have happened to him," Ngobazi told local news cameras. He was the first to organize prayer meetings in support of Drake's family. He joined search parties and combed the neighborhood with others. The police closed the case after 6 months, officially calling it a possible runaway case. A new blow, July 1997. Riverview had barely forgotten the story of the missing Drake when another tragedy struck the town. 8-year-old Layla Topanga, a cheerful and bouncy girl, disappeared after Sunday service. Her family stayed a little longer, talking with other parishioners, and Layla ran to play in the churchyard. When her parents started looking for her half an hour later, she was gone. That night, the police were on the alert, combing every yard and corner of the city. But Layla just disappeared, just like Drake. She couldn't run away. She was small, afraid of the dark, always asking her parents to hold her hand. And then Zach Ngobazi was there again. He said the right words, supported the family, organized new searches, and spoke to the community. "We cannot let our children go missing. We are all one family." The community looked at him with gratitude. "It's so good that we have Zach. He's always there for us when we're grieving." But no one realized that Zach was also there when the children disappeared. There was one unwritten but clear prohibition at Holy Rescue Church. No one went into the basement without Pastor Ngobazi's permission. The door downstairs was usually locked. Only the pastor himself and a few trusted church workers had access. Even the servants did not go down there without orders. If children asked why, adults would answer, "The church property is kept there. The old library closed for the homeless. Things for the elderly parishioners." But over time, some children began to notice strange things. Words that were not heard. Ezekiel Diop, an 11-year-old boy, was one of those who was not afraid to ask questions. He lived in a family of devout Catholics and spent a lot of time in church. One day he came home with frightened eyes and told his mother, "Mom, I heard children crying in the basement." She laughed at first, It must be screams from the street. But the boy insisted, no, Mom, it was underground. It was not the wind. Someone was calling for help. She told him not to make things up and scare his younger brothers anymore. A few days later, Ezekiel tried to tell one of the adults in the church, a woman who helped distribute food to the homeless. She smiled at him and said, Pastor Ngobize would never let bad things happen in God's house. And the boy fell silent. Other children also remembered that there was one room in the church where you could not go. One day we were playing hide and seek, recalled Lisa Kovalchuk, 9, and I wanted to hide behind the door that led downstairs. But the pastor suddenly appeared and said very angrily, Don't ever go there. His voice changed then. It was not the same as usual. After that, Lisa never went near the basement again. The silence of the community, all these moments could be noticed. But Riverview was a small town. There was no room for suspicion. Here Pastor Ngobeze was a saint. Therefore, when children said they heard crying from the basement, adults did not listen. It was only many years later that these words began to sound like a warning that no one heard. Holy Rescue Church has always been a symbol of stability in Riverview. People believed that this place was as eternal as faith itself, but time and nature were merciless. In August 2019, after heavy rains, part of the ceiling in the eastern wing of the building collapsed. It was a minor accident. The plaster crumbled right next to the altar, and part of the wall cracked. The church council urgently allocated funds to repair the basement, as it was the foundation of the entire building. The contractors started work in September. They were expecting the usual process of strengthening the walls, but with the first blows of the hammers, they came across something strange. As the craftsmen dismantled the old masonry, they saw a cavity behind the wall. What the hell is this? One of the workers muttered, illuminating the empty space with a flashlight. The dust dissipated, and they could see a narrow corridor stretching into the darkness. At the end was an iron door. It was bricked up decades ago. The builders were amazed. This room was not mentioned in the building plans or in any documents. Someone tried to make a joke. Is this the entrance to hell? But after they broke through the door and saw the first bones, the joke stopped. The police arrived half an hour later. The church basement was completely closed to outsiders. Only criminalists, forensic experts, and investigators were allowed in. At first, everyone thought they were dealing with an old burial site, perhaps from colonial times. But with each passing hour, this version lost its meaning. The bones belonged to children. The victims were aged between 6 and 12 years old. After this discovery, the police took to the walls. Something told the investigators that this was not just an abandoned building. When the experts began to examine the masonry, they came across bricked-up cavities containing handwritten notes wrapped in cloth. The police carefully opened them. What they saw changed everything. These were not just books. They were the carefully documented worldview of Pastor Zacharias Ngobeze. Each entry was a rule, an explanation, an order to himself. It did not look like something written in madness. On the contrary, the pages were organized. The text was legible, even emphasized with different inks. Holy isolation is a necessity for the purification of the soul. Those who wander in darkness must find the light. Children are born with sin. They do not know obedience. They do not understand the fear of God. But I can help them. The notebooks contained lists of names: Drake Malabi, Layla Topanga, and 5 other children's names that the police had not previously linked to the disappearances. Purification rituals. In another book, on worn pages, detectives found a description of procedures that the pastor called purification rituals. Every wandering lamb must be tested. God does not accept lazy souls. If they survive, they will become pure. If they do not survive, it means they were chosen. I am not their killer. I am only the one who opened the door for them. Several pages detailed how the pastor left the children in the darkness of the basement without food or water so that they would learn to pray. Sometimes they stayed there for days, sometimes for weeks. If the child passed the test, he was returned to the world. If not, they became a sacrifice for the sake of God's will. The last notebook contained the most eerie passage. If the police find this, it means that I have not completed my work. They will not understand me, just as they did not understand the Savior. but I know that I have fulfilled my mission." These words were written in a confident, clear handwriting. Ngobese knew that he could be exposed, but he did not stop. The police realized that this was not an accident or the result of a sick imagination. It was an ideology. And the worst part was that no one in Riverview had suspected it all these years. When the police officially announced that Pastor Zacharias Ngobese was the prime suspect in the case of the missing children, his family was stunned. His wife Marissa sat in their small home, clutching the phone in her shaking hands, trying to process what she had just heard. Her husband is the man she has lived with for over 30 years. Her husband is the man who prayed by their bedside every night. Her husband is the man who raised their children. Detained, accused of a series of ritualistic murders. "I didn't know anything, or didn't want to know," she whispered to herself as she looked in the mirror. Her world was falling apart. Children who did not want to believe their children, Nia, 29, and Lamech, 25, heard about it on the news. They could not believe that their father, whom they knew as a kind, loving person, could do something like that. "It's some kind of mistake," Nia kept repeating to her brother on the phone. "It's a provocation. The police got it wrong." Lamech could not say anything. He just sat in his workshop, clutching his phone. In their eyes, their father was a hero. He taught them to be honest, to help those in need, to be good people. But the more they read the articles, the more they listened to the news, the more doubts grew in their minds. What if, 2 days after the arrest, the police began to search Ngobese's house more thoroughly? Among the piles of church documents, Bibles, and prayer books, they came across an old metal box. They found it in the pantry, among other junk. The police opened it. Inside was a VHS tape dated 1996. When the experts watched the tape, the detective's office was dead silent. On the screen, they saw the basement of the church. The camera was mounted on a tripod, and in front of it were several children in the dark. Their eyes were wide with fear. The figure of Pastor Ngobese appeared in the frame. His voice sounded calm. "Sinners must repent. God is testing us." Then the camera focused on one of the children. The boy's face was clearly visible. It was Drake Mulabi. No one had seen him alive since 1996. The police didn't even know what to do with the footage. But when Nia and Lamech saw it, the last vestiges of their faith in their father shattered. Now they could not deny the truth. Their father was a monster. December 2019. After the bones of the children were found in the basement of the Holy Salvation Church, Riverview was no longer the same town. News of this instantly spread across the country. Reporters surrounded the church, residents whispered, but no one could believe that their pastor had anything to do with it. Suspicion fell on Zacharias Ngobese, but there was no formal charge. The police were waiting for the results of the DNA analysis, and the pastor himself continued to act as if nothing had happened. He was summoned several times for unofficial interrogations, and he calmly answered questions without showing any fear or nervousness. "I'm as shocked as you are, officer," he said. But on December 9th, everything changed. The FBI handed the police the results of the examination. The remains belonged to Drake Mulabi and Layla Topanga. The authorities could not wait any longer. The arrest warrant for Zacharias Ngobese has been signed. Operation Clean Slate. The arrest was planned quietly. The police did not want the city to see it with their own eyes. But the pastor himself seemed to feel that they would come for him. On December 10th, he was last seen in the church. He locked himself in his office and did not let anyone in. The next morning, the police went to his house, but the door was open. There was no one inside. The bed was unmade. There was an unfinished cup of tea on the table. He was gone. The police pulled out all the stops, blacklisting airline passengers, checking surveillance cameras, tracking bank transactions. On December 11th, they received a message. Ngobe was spotted on a highway 40 kilometers from the city. He was hiding in an abandoned house, a former shelter for the homeless that had been closed many years ago. At 3:15 a.m., a SWAT team broke into the building. There was an empty bottle of whiskey on the floor and 2 used needles next to it. The pastor was sitting on an old chair looking at the wall. He did not even resist. When the officers were handcuffing him, he turned his head and said, "You do not realize what you are doing." No tears, no fear, just a cold, empty look. The police took him out at night while the whole city was sleeping, And when people woke up in the morning, the news was already making headlines. A saint who was adored turned out to be a monster. The trial of Pastor Zacharias Ngobizi began in September 2020 in Winnipeg. It was a case that captured the attention of all of Canada. The prosecution accused Ngobizi of serial kidnappings and murders of children that lasted almost 2 decades. Prosecutors argued that he walled up the victims in the basement, condemning them to starvation, and justified it with his distorted religious ideology. The main evidence was a VHS tape found in his house, but the most painful were the testimonies of the families of the disappeared children. Drake Malabi's mother, Esther, could not hold back her tears in court. "I trusted him. I believed he was helping our city, and he was just killing children." As she spoke, Ngobizi sat motionless. Family breakdown. His wife Marissa attended the trial only once. She sat in the back of the courtroom, not looking up. When the judge asked her if she had anything to say, she just said, "I don't know this person anymore." The next day she filed for divorce. His children, Nia and Lemek, officially changed their surname. They moved to another city and cut all ties with the past. "We never want to hear that name again," Lemek told reporters. The verdict. The trial lasted almost a year. The jury reached its decision after 3 hours of deliberations. The judge read out the verdict. Pastor Zacharias Ngobizi is found guilty of numerous murders and abductions of children. The court sentences him to life imprisonment without the possibility of early release. The courtroom was quiet. Ngobi showed no emotion. He just nodded as if it were a formality. After the hearing, he was led away in handcuffs. One of the journalists asked, "Do you have any regrets?" Ngobizi turned his head and smiled slightly. He did not answer. 2022, Millhaven Penitentiary, one of the toughest prisons in Canada. After 2 years in solitary confinement, Ngobizi was used to isolation. He did not communicate with other inmates, did not respond to the guards' taunts, and did not ask to see his relatives. No one visited him. His life in prison was transparent and predictable. Therefore, on August 14, 2022, when the guard opened the cell door for the morning check, he did not expect anything out of the ordinary. But Ngobizi did not get out of bed. His hands were cold. His body had no signs of life. The doctor pronounced him dead on the spot. An overdose. The toxicology results shocked the prison authorities. A high dose of heroin was found in the pastor's blood. It was an overdose. But the main question remained unanswered. Where did he get the drugs? Ngobizi had no contact with other prisoners. He had no visitors. None of the guards could explain how a clean batch of heroin got into the prison. No syringes or packaging were found in his cell. Just a dead body. Just a blank stare that said nothing more. His death left more questions than answers.